In this lesson, we're going to talk about some fraud and scams. Frauds and scams are considered to be a form of social engineering. First, we have fraud. Fraud is a wrongful or criminal deception that is intended to result in financial or personal gain for the attacker. Basically, when an attacker attempts to commit fraud against you, they are trying to essentially steal from you in some way. The difference between fraud and regular theft, though, is that with fraud, you're going to be tricked into handing over your valuables, such as your information or your money, instead of the attacker breaking into your account and stealing it directly from you. This is why it is considered to be part of social engineering. One of the most common types of fraud that you will see online is known as identity fraud or identity theft. Identity fraud or identity theft involves the use by one person of another person's personal information without their authorization to commit a crime or deceive or defraud that other person or some other third party. These days, we commonly hear the terms identity fraud or identity theft. Criminals are routinely trying to steal your social security number, your date of birth, where you were born, and other sensitive personal information that could be used to steal your identity. Now, when somebody commits identity theft, they're actually stealing another person's identity and using it as their own. Their goal is to impersonate their victim so that they can take their social security number and apply for a new credit card as if they were the victimized person. Often, you will hear the terms identity fraud and identity theft being used interchangeably, even though there is a slight difference between them. With identity fraud, the attacker might just take the victim's credit card and then go make charges as if they were the victim. Technically, this is considered identity fraud and not identity theft. For it to be identity theft, the attacker will try to fully assume the identity of the victim. For example, if a person from outside the United States stole your name, address, social security number, and birth date from you and then started a new job in the United States using your social security number and your identity, that would technically be identity theft and not identity fraud. But these days, more people will use both terms interchangeably, and more commonly you'll hear identity theft used as the preferred combined term, even though CompTIA prefers to use the term identity fraud to describe both of these types of attacks. Scams, on the other hand, are simply a fraudulent or deceptive act or operation. It is a really short definition for a really large and broad concept. Essentially, a scam occurs whenever someone tries to deceive their victim into doing something. Now, there are many different ways that scams can be conducted, but for our purposes, let's just consider a common scam that is used against businesses all the time. This common scam is called the invoice scam. When we talk about an invoice scam, this is a scam in which a person is tricked into paying for a fake invoice for a product or service that they did not actually order. Now, there's many different variations of this invoice scam, but the typical one goes something like this. An employee at your company gets a phone call, and when they answer the phone call, they are asked a few basic questions by the attacker. This attacker might ask you a few questions about the type of printer you have or verify an order that you've placed for a certain type of toner. So they'll say, "Oh, are you still using the HP LaserJet A330? Now, they may or may not know what model the company is using, but they're trying to set up a pretext during the call. The employee might agree if the attacker gets right, or may correct the attacker by saying something like, "Oh no, we're currently using the Lexmark B612 printer." And then the attacker will acknowledge the change and react by saying something like, "Oh, I'll make sure to get that fixed on the order. I have an order for 2 boxes of toner ready to ship out to your office. It should be there by tomorrow, okay?" And instinctively, the employee will say yes or okay, and the attacker now has them recorded saying yes. Then a couple days later, the boxes of toner will arrive to the office. The employee thinks nothing is wrong since they took the call and verified the order, and then the toner arrived. But the company gets the bill for that toner, and it will be a really large amount over the retail cost of the same toner from an office supply store. For example, you might be able to order that toner for $100 per box on Amazon or at Office Depot, but you just received a bill for $950 for 2 boxes of toner that an attacker shipped to your office. Now, the reason this is called an invoice scam is because you have now received a legitimate invoice from this attacker for the toner, and it will state that there was no refunds or no exchanges, and they have recording of your employee saying okay or yes to place that order. Now, this invoice scam doesn't just involve toner, but it can be for anything your office consumes regularly. So your staff needs to be trained on how to avoid falling victim to these types of attacks. Another more technical attack involving invoice scams occurs when an attacker sends an invoice to the billing department of your company as a PDF attachment to spearfish email. When the billing department's employee opens the invoice to see how much is due, the PDF uses embedded malicious code to inflict their computer and provide the attacker access to it using a remote access Trojan. Again, if you receive an email from an untrusted or unknown sender, it should be analyzed before you open the attachments, especially PDFs of invoices, since they could contain malware that could infect your entire enterprise. So remember, when we talk about identity fraud and invoice scams, these are considered to be rather low-tech social engineering techniques. For example, with identity fraud, an attacker might call you on the phone and get you to give the information, just like your date of birth or your mother's maiden name or things like that, to steal pieces of your identity. But these attacks can be technical, such as embedded malware inside of an invoice scam spearphishing email.